So our first keynote speaker is John Cao. I'd like to welcome to the stage Mr. Creativity. You will now get to hear John's thoughts on the age of innovation we now live in. His experience as a Harvard Business School professor has enabled him to create breakthrough learning methods to boost students' creativity. But what impact do these methods have on students' learning? Let's find out more. Please welcome John to the stage.
Do my best. Good afternoon, and thank you very much for being here. Thank you very much to KHDA for the invitation to share some thoughts about the whole notion of the age of innovation, which we are in today, the role of education in fostering a climate, and in the case of Dubai, a nation of innovators. Can we have the first slide, please? Well, while we're doing that, I've been working in the innovation field broadly defined for about 30 years. I've done it in a lot of different ways. I've been an entrepreneur in Silicon Valley. I've been a professor at Harvard Business School for 14 years, where I started the innovation curriculum and taught it for MBAs and executives. I've advised countries on national innovation policy, 10 countries to date. Actually have been coming to this part of the world for about 15 years. Was involved in Dubai Media City and was a board advisor to 2454 in Abu Dhabi. So I have a little bit more than a surface acquaintance with this part of the world. And as you may know, innovation is becoming a worldwide preoccupation. There are probably these days about 50 countries around the world that have national innovation strategies of one kind or another. They have a Ministry of Innovation, they have a National Innovation Lead, they have budgets for innovation. I'm on a US-China coordination committee between the US White House and the Chinese Ministry of Science and Technology. So I have a bird's eye view, for instance, on what's going on in China, and there are reports that as much as $500 billion is being spent on China's national innovation strategy. So countries are not just talking about innovation, they're actually doing something about it with their checkbooks, which is the bottom line. So I'm still waiting for the first slide. I don't know if you guys... That's not the first slide. What's that? What's that? Oh, okay. So apparently we have a technical issue on the visuals, but that's okay. This is material that's quite familiar to me. So, so everybody in the world is talking about innovation. If you went and did a Google search for the word innovation, and you then thought about this following question: how many searches for innovation on Google have been conducted in the last 12 months? What would your guess be about the number of searches that have been done for the word innovation? How many times has somebody typed in the word innovation in the Google search box? Anybody take a guess? A million? 50 billion, okay, that's a pretty big range. Any other guesses? 1,000, okay. The answer the last time I checked was about 3 billion. And that is the good news and the bad news. The good news is that people are talking about innovation, they think it is important. The bad news is that the word is used so indiscriminately that it threatens to sink into meaninglessness unless we define it. So my goals for our time together today are to give you a point of view about innovation and to explain why this is the age of innovation. And secondly, to relate it to this question of how do you educate for innovation and in doing so, innovate education, because the two I think are related. And then the third topic that I will talk about is edge makers, which is my current obsession. For the last 3 years, I've been involved in starting and developing an enterprise which I believe will have a lot of impact as a mechanism for empowering young people worldwide to become highly skillful innovators in order to have a positive effect in the world and way ahead of schedule. And I'd like to share some ideas about edge makers with you and also tell you then what some of our plans are for Dubai and get your advice, because this is a new area of interest for us. So 3 topics: innovation, the age of innovation, education and innovation, and then edge makers and innovation. So it is the age of innovation for many reasons. First of all, as I mentioned, there are 50-some countries around the world that have national innovation strategies. So political leaders think it is important. But you'd have to be blind not to see the acceleration of technological progress. You know, technology stimulates the development of innovation capacity, especially in an era of machine learning, in an era of 3D printing, in an era of computerized sequencing of the human genetic code. And increases in innovation capacity, in turn, affect the acceleration of technology. So there's a virtuous cycle between technology and innovation. Secondly, or thirdly rather, you see a lot of what in Silicon Valley are called unicorns, new companies that have valuations of over $1 billion US dollars. And the time from startup to achieving $1 billion valuation has shortened dramatically to the point where, you know, a Microsoft, for instance, took something like 12 years to achieve $1 billion valuation. But Oculus Rift, which is the high-end virtual reality glasses company that was purchased by Facebook, achieved $1 billion valuation in 1 year and 3 months. So this acceleration is about value creation. It's the acceleration of the pace of technological innovation. But I think it also is the age of innovation because it's what young people want. So so-called Generation Z, young people that were born around the turn of the millennium, the year 2000, were born into a world very different from the previous generation of millennials. Millennials, in a way, were the last generation to have it good, right? The economy was good, jobs were good, the world was reasonably stable. But Generation Z was born into a world where we were all alarmed about the climate crisis. The world was apparently increasingly filled with violence. We had an economic meltdown in the earlier part of the first decade of this new millennium that caused a lot of distress, unemployment, things of this kind. And so this is a generation that is coming into a world that's filled with challenges. And the wonderful thing about Generation Z worldwide, whether it's the kids outside in the lobby or in San Francisco where I live or wherever, is that they see the problems and they want to do something about them. It's a very purpose-driven generation. The question, how can I help, is a very common question. So it's the age of innovation because young people want to acquire the tools to amplify their natural creativity in order to find solutions for the big problems that face the world. It's the age of innovation because the world is filled with complex problems. How many of you are familiar with the concept of wicked problems? All right, so a few experts in the front row. A wicked problem is defined as a problem that's so complex that it's impossible to solve by normal, rational methods. This is an actual term of art that was written about by a guy named Horst Riddle, who was a political scientist back in the 1960s, who studied problems that were seemingly impossible to solve, you know, like poverty or environmental problems. And the world is filled with wicked problems. You know, you think about poverty or peace or health and disease. These are wicked problems. And the only thing that will allow us to address wicked problems is the ability to innovate. Okay? So there are many reasons why it is the age of innovation, why innovation is always in the top 3 of priorities of corporate leaders these days, and why many government leaders around the world are embracing it. But the issue is that this enthusiasm for innovation often is not supported by a deeper understanding either of what innovation is and how it works, or even how to define it. You know, if you get 10 leaders in a room, whether they're from the private sector or the public sector, you'll probably get 5 or 6 different definitions. There's a very big mushiness around what is innovation, how is it different from creativity, how is creativity different from entrepreneurship, right? And so I think it is very important for us here to kind of have a handle on what is innovation, and more importantly, how to do it. So I'm going to illustrate that point with reference to music, because music was actually my first career goal back when I was 6 years old. And even today, I'm pretty active with music. Yamaha, 2 years ago, made me their first artist in innovation, because you know, I often use music to illustrate the principles of how the creative process and the innovation process work. So let's start with the following thought experiment. How many of you play music or are familiar with music? So about 15% of you. Okay, so I have to explain to the rest of the audience what you already know, which is that there are 2 ways of making music. You can go to the store and you can buy a piece of sheet music. If I had my slides, I would show you sheet music, but you've probably seen musical notes, black circles on staffs, five lines, and it tells you where to play the notes, and it tells you how loud to play them. And in the case of piano music, there's often an asterisk at the bottom of the line which tells you, where to put your foot on the pedal and when to take your foot off the pedal. So in a way, the sheet music is kind of like the instructions for the performance of the piano music. And all the musician really has to do, but also all the musician can do, is to play the notes that they're the way they're written. So you have a choice of playing the notes correctly or incorrectly, right? So for example, if I went to the music store and I bought a piece of sheet music, I'll use a jazz standard song, All the Things You Are, and I had the sheet music right in front of me. This is kind of what it would sound like. So, I don't know what you thought of that. I thought that was pretty boring, actually, kind of dry and simple, but maybe some of you liked it, so I'll play it again. I'll vary the expression, I'll try to communicate it differently, I'll go. Anyway, you get the idea. It gets old and almost painful pretty quickly. So the other way of making music is improvised music, and the kind of improvised music that I like the best is jazz. Jazz is music that is created in the moment, and it has to sound good, or people will not buy the CD, they'll leave the room, they'll leave the jazz club, they won't buy tickets to your concert. So it's both creative and also it has to create value for somebody. And this is what that same tune would sound like if I decided to play a jazz version of it. So bear with me. can hear the tune. It was just reharmonized and dressed up a little bit. But now the real challenge of a jazz musician is to play new notes based on the existing framework. And you remember the melody. So I'm going to do that for you right now. I could go on and on. It's okay. This is a sneaky way for me to play music for other people while I'm up on stage. You know, I put a little music in. But the point I want to make here is that none of those notes were written down. And I didn't plan or rehearse those notes that I played. And if you said to me, your life now depends on playing exactly the notes you just played, I couldn't do it. That was improvisation, right? Now, this is a big thought because innovation and improvisation are basically the same phenomenon dressed in different clothing. So, people often have a misconception about jazz. They think it is basically playing whatever notes you feel like playing in the moment. Well, that's not true. I mean, if I were sitting here and you said, okay, play that jazz like you're playing whatever you feel like in the moment, anyway, you get the idea. Unless you like really weird music, this wouldn't be something you'd go out and buy as a CD. So there's something else going on here. You know, jazz has a structure, it has a grammar, and it has something else, which is it comes from practice, it comes from discipline. I mean, for example, if I said to Dr. Abdullah, you know, after I finish, there's something else I'd like to do with you because, you know, you're a friend and we're going to try something different. So you're going to give a jazz piano concert. And I'm going to do all the things that a great leader does. You know, I'm going to encourage you. I'm going to say, you know, Dr. Abdullah, you can do it. We'll take away the risk of any, you know, problems. I'll give you a piece of paper and it'll show you where to put all of your fingers and all the notes. We'll all applaud. We'll keep the piano here. You know, we'll show you in the values statement of KHDA where it says, you know, be fearless to create new things, et cetera, right? And what's my point? My point is that unless he has been practicing in secret for 10 years, or in his case for probably 5 years, because he's a really smart guy, you know, and doing things like this. Hundreds and thousands of times, or in jazz terms, it would be this scale. Over and over and over and over again. So jazz is not a mood, it's not a wish, it's what in the management literature is called a capability. And innovation is a capability. And capabilities are developed through practice. And once you have a capability through practice, you own it, you know. So there's a real difference in learning between what you could call academic knowledge versus practice knowledge versus knowledge that comes from engagement in society. So academic knowledge would be me saying, okay, I'm going to show you a PowerPoint presentation and give you a textbook on pianos. And I'm going to ask you to read the textbook, and I'm going to give you tests to make sure you've memorized all the information. Will you be able to play the piano, is my question. And the answer is obviously no, right? So academic knowledge in the traditional sense of study, PowerPoint, et cetera, is of limited value when it comes to developing the capability of playing the piano. And I would argue it's of equally limited value when it comes to cultivating the capability for innovation. Because innovation requires practice, and even more importantly, it requires engagement with society. So a jazz musician, once they develop certain skills, well, you know, they can play, but it's only when they play in a jazz club, when they play for somebody else, when they play with other people, that their music becomes meaningful and relevant, and it comes alive. So this notion of capability, I think, is really important because, you know, I spend a lot of time talking with leaders about innovation policy, and, you know, it's easy to get people excited about innovation. What is hard is to get them to see that underneath that interest is a deep need to develop the capability of innovation. It's the answer to the question of how do you do it, which is, in a way, the most important, and which then leads to the question of how do you teach it? Because if you want innovation in a country like Dubai, for instance, and, you know, Sheikh Mohammed says, you know, Dubai is going to be one of the most innovative countries in the world within 7 years, which is now 6 years, right? How are you going to do that? Well, you're going to have to have people who know how to do innovation, right? I mean, innovation is not sitting in a black box or a test tube. Innovation comes from people. And if you want innovation that comes from people, you have to help them learn how to do it, because otherwise the process of doing innovation becomes very random. You know, it's like Steve Jobs. He had a weird family background, i.e. he was an orphan, right? He had a dysfunctional upbringing, and he had all of this energy for starting a company. I mean, he was a set of personal accidents in a way. We were all a set of personal accidents, but some of them lead to an entrepreneurial career. Well, if I'm the leader of Dubai or the leader of China and I want innovation, I cannot wait for accidents to happen. I have to start, pardon me, putting innovation into the core of what young people learn, i.e. formal education, right? So it kind of begs the question of what the purpose of education is. You know, I mean, if the purpose of education is to equip young people to be successful in the world as it exists today, filled with wicked problems, requiring innovation, requiring collaborative skills, requiring the ability to tell compelling narratives, requiring entrepreneurial skills and experience, what are schools of today then doing about cultivating those skills, right? And music is a really interesting way of unpeeling these concepts, right? Because I've talked about, well, PowerPoint, textbooks, academic knowledge. I've talked about practice. One of the other things that I need to just share with you is this notion that innovation, as we're talking about it, is often the result of creative tensions between polar opposites. So the notion of structure versus freedom, the notion of what you know versus what you don't know, all become blended together into the act of performance, right? So music has a structure, you know. In Western music, this is the fundamental set of chord progressions that determines the backbone of Western harmony. It's based on the note and itself, the note and a fifth, and the note and a fourth. And if I had an oscilloscope and we had an hour, I would do the acoustics, the physics of this whole principle. But the way the human ear is engineered and the way sound propagates in the air are marvels of engineering. Humans are very lucky because we have music. Music, in a way, is an accident, and it's an accident of the curling of our inner ear, the cochlear membrane, and the Pythagorean mathematics of how sound propagates, so that this sounds harmonious, but this doesn't sound resolved. So with those 3 chords, I can generate a huge amount of variety. But it's also this kind of music. The blues, right? Or if your tastes run to rock and roll, and it's all the same structure, right? So there are rules. There's discipline, there's a grammar, there's structure, but there's also freedom. And, you know, innovation is the negotiation between the structure and the freedom, which then leads to the question of how do you instill the right kind of human skills as character strengths in students in schools. We're used to seeing lists, and the lists of 21st century skills we're all familiar with. At EdgeMakers, we actually decided to do something a little bit different and define the skill sets as ranges, as creative tensions. So, you know, to be experimental is sometimes to be highly speculative and at times to be highly implementation oriented. And where you decide to put yourself in that spectrum is a variable depending upon the circumstance. So we want to generate judgment, we want to generate wisdom, not just a mechanical set of rules. Is there any chance we can get the slides, or are we totally hosed in that department? We're totally hosed. Okay, so I had some videos and some materials, but I'm hopefully doing a decent job of trying to evoke that material for you here up on stage. So, okay, so we've talked about, this is the age of innovation. We've talked about a definition of innovation, right? Innovation to me is a complex phenomenon. Anytime somebody says to you, oh, I'm interested in innovation, you're interested in innovation? That's great. The first thing you have to ask them is, what do you mean by innovation? Right? Just to clarify definitions. The dictionary would define innovation as creativity applied to some purpose to generate value, which is a pretty good definition, right? I tend to look at it as a set of capabilities. You know, we've now defined capabilities. And by the way, those capabilities can be a personal capability, they can be an organizational capability, they can be a national capability, right? And what for? What is the capability for? It's to achieve a desired future. So for me, innovation always has to be about something. It's not just a good practice like brushing your teeth. You know, innovation has to be about, in a sense, fulfilling some personal or national or organizational desire, the desired future state, right? So this whole notion then that innovation begins with creativity but ends with the realization of value with a number of steps in between is an important topic to keep in mind. At EdgeMakers, we decided that there were 5 core disciplines. The first was creative skills, right? So how do you basically stimulate the production of new ideas in yourself? Everybody is creative, so I want to make sure that you appreciate that creativity and talent are 2 different things. Everyone, by virtue of being human, has the ability to generate new ideas. You know, we can't help it. It's the way our brains are wired. Humans are constantly thinking about new things, at least new things to them. But it doesn't mean that those new ideas are necessarily original or that they're really any good, right? So everyone's creative, but not everybody is Mozart or Picasso or Steve Jobs, right? But if we had a different format, in about a half an hour, I could teach you 10 different ways of boosting your individual ability to produce a larger quantity of ideas. This is technique-oriented. It's not difficult. There's a long tradition of how to do that. And creativity also operates at the level of interpersonal relationships. So I have a working relationship with somebody. It can either foster creative expression or it can inhibit it, right? So there's a psychological, interpersonal psychology dimension. Then there are creative teams. Why are some teams great? You know, every startup, every entrepreneurial startup is a team, right? Some teams work well, others don't. Organizations. You know, some organizations seem very good at fostering creativity, others not. And then countries and national culture, some of which are conducive to creativity and others not. But generating the new idea is just the starting point, okay? We then define 3 disciplines that are about amplifying the power of ideas. And those 3 disciplines are storytelling, digital fluency, and design. Storytelling, well, you know, it's presentation skills, but it's also using the full range of media, digital and otherwise, to create compelling ways of conveying the meaning of an idea. Story is important because with it, you can change behavior and perception, and without it, it's very difficult to do that. And ideas only gain power when they have influence, and in some cases, when they spread in a viral fashion, so to speak. Digital fluency is a term that is just beginning to become more widely accepted. We look at digital fluency not so much as digital literacy, which is knowing how the digital technologies work, social media, et cetera, but knowing how to apply social media and other digital tools to affect changes in the world, whether it's changes in a customer's perception of your product, whether it's changes in a social group where, you know, the social group says, well, we're going to improve our health behavior, let's say, you know, sort of behavioral economics. And then design is a discipline which knows very well how to take ideas and develop them. So prototyping, user-centeredness, these are all ways of adding to ideas, putting form on ideas, right? So you've got creativity, then you've got 3 amplification disciplines, and then you've got entrepreneurship. Entrepreneurship means the behavior of people who know how to take ideas and realize value from them. And an entrepreneur does not have to create the idea. If somebody went out and, you know, I started a new mall in Dubai that was very successful, you would say, oh, they're a great entrepreneur, but you wouldn't say that that was such a creative idea necessarily. If you own 50 McDonald's franchises, you're a very happy person from a personal financial perspective, but it's not very creative. But the entrepreneur recognizes the value of ideas and then knows how to extract the value from those ideas. So if you take innovation as the whole chain of events, from the origination of ideas all the way to the realization of value, and you look at the disciplines in between, that is the EdgeMakers framework, but that's also how we look at innovation, which is complicated and not simple. It's not one thing, it's a number of different elements that come together. And one of the issues, I think, for educators is that you're being sold a lot of stuff. So there are people out there who are trying to sell you creativity skills, there are people who are trying to sell you design thinking workshops, there are people who are trying to sell you lean startup, you know, et cetera, et cetera. And this reflects the guild mentality of all of these different disciplines. You know, ideation really comes from the tradition of psychology. You look at Adam Osborne and Edward de Bono and all these people, they were psychologists, or they are psychologists. And design thinkers come from industrial designers, applying the skills of design for making products to designing strategies, right? And entrepreneurship comes from management studies. And all of these different professional guilds are vying for market share. They're vying for the attention of the world, which is understandable. But I think what needs to happen, and what we have tried to do in EdgeMakers, is to create a kind of an integrated perspective, you know, kind of a Rosetta Stone, pardon me, in a way where all of these sub-disciplines can come together under one umbrella. And with these 5 disciplines, what we're now in a position to do is to address some of these so-called wicked problems. So we've just launched a new curriculum called Sustainability, Innovation, and Social Justice, which, as you might be aware, there are many companies now whose entire innovation agenda is sustainability. And sustainability is now viewed as an engine for economic growth and for innovation in many respects. So understanding sustainability needs, and by the way, understanding sustainability needs beyond the narrow definition of ecosystems and trees to the urban environment, share economy, new business models, is a way of, in a sense, having that broader narrative around the connection between sustainability and innovation. We're also looking at the subject matter of peacemaking and innovation, especially because, again, this is an area that young people have a big stake in. We're doing quite a bit of work in Colombia right now, which, as you may know, has been having a really stupid civil war for many decades, where the people with the most moral authority are the young people who say, we don't want to be in a civil war. You know, our parents and our grandparents were stupid. We want to be friends with people across the conflict line, and we want to work to innovate ways of reaching out to our brothers and sisters and healing the wounds of society. It's a very beautiful thing, right? But it requires not the wish to innovate. You know, it's easy to wish to innovate. Oh, let's wish to innovate, right? And we'll put a nice public campaign around it. The difficult part is actually learning how to do it at a mass scale, right? Which is very much why I'm here to speak with you today, because I believe that is not only achievable, but it is beginning to happen around the world. Okay, so we've talked about it's the age of innovation. I hope I persuaded you that innovation is important. I hope I persuaded you that it's useful to have a crisp definition of innovation and also a way of understanding it as being a complex and not a simple phenomenon. We've talked about the whole notion of innovation as a capability, not a wish, right? Not as a mood. You know, so many leaders say, oh, we do innovation, we have a recognition campaign for innovators. Well, that's not building innovation capability, that's creating a culture of innovation, which is important, but if that's all you do, if all of it is setting a mood, you're not going to have a sustained innovation engine. Sustained innovation engine is spending 10 years practicing so that even when you get to be my age, you can still get up on stage and play the piano, right? It's a sustained capability. And very often I'll talk with leaders and I'll say, okay, so what are your capabilities for innovation that you practice regularly that lead to some advantage for your organization or your country? And very often the answer is a blank stare, right? So this notion of making innovation capabilities objective, learnable, and creating alignment around these would seem to be a very important agenda for all of us, and especially for educators, for those of us that are entrusted with the responsibility of raising up the next generation and preparing them for the real world, the world as it exists today, which is all about the age of innovation. So, you think about the mental model behind education historically has been based on the industrial model. You have people sitting in rows in classrooms. They're doing the same thing at the same time. They're being evaluated with objective measurements, which then determine who advances and at what speed. And there's a very kind of rational flavor to the entire process, which is designed to help society decide who the A grade people are and who the B grade people and who the C grade people are, so you can decide where they're going to go to college or what kind of a job they're going to get. Well, that works in an industrial model. It doesn't work at all in an innovation model, right? An innovation model, an innovation age, is very much about individual expression. It's about personalization. It's about facilitation. It's about understanding the experience of each learner. It's about really helping learners to craft a learning journey through a large amount of learning assets, right? We want to, in the latter case, in the age of innovation, empower young people to be better communicators, better collaborators, more emotionally intelligent, more culturally intelligent, more empowered around managing their creativity and the creativity of others, able to create compelling narratives, able to present those narratives in a wide array of formats, able to leverage digital technology to make things happen, and able to kind of couple their natural sense of purpose to a desire to do things that are a benefit for society, for all of us, in a way. So, to me, what could be more important? Now, of course, there's also math and history and literature and languages and many other things. But up until now, if you were to ask the question, where do you learn those capabilities? In the classroom, I'm not sure that we would have much of an answer. I mean, maybe you learn some of these skills if you're on a sports team or something like that. So, the goal of edge makers, I'll now move into my third topic, has been very much to try to imagine what a definitive learning experience for young innovators would look like. And I've assembled a team that for the last 3 years has been working to create two things. One of which is a large body of learning assets. We now have about 350 lesson units on these various topics that I've described. And the other part is a digital, what we would call a learning ecology or a learning environment that interacts with the learning assets. So it's both curriculum and digital. We decided that we would first go into schools because schools are where young people are. Our goal is not to be explicitly change agents for the education system. We just want to put our value proposition into the hands of young people. So we launched a high school version of Edge Makers. It comes in two packages, one of which is a 150 lesson, multiple year curriculum, right? Middle school, upper school, and secondary school. We also have an accelerated version of Edge Makers, which is only 30 sessions, which can be done either in class or in an alternative learning environment. And we have a sister course called Digital Fluency, which is paired with that. We've created a higher education version of the accelerated program and Digital Fluency. And we also have a very important and emerging digital strategy for self-directed learners. The direct-to-schools effort has been pursued over the last 12 months in 4 countries. We are now deployed in India, where we have been adopted by 100 of the top private schools in India. We are active in Brazil. We are active in Colombia as a stepping stone to Spanish-speaking Latin America, and we're active in the United States. And we're beginning to explore opportunities to be active in China, and we're obviously interested in looking at Dubai as the centerpiece of our strategy for the entire region. The response has been extraordinary. We feel that we have tapped into a growing desire to be part of a global youth movement centered around innovation and entrepreneurship for socially positive ends. The response from young people has simply been overwhelming. In addition, we have a professional development regime which has worked extremely well. In its initial phase, it is like going to boot camp for 2 one-day sessions. Teachers find the material compelling, not just if they want to teach edge makers, but if they want to teach, period. Because what teacher would not want to enhance their ability to foster the creativity of their students, the collaboration between the students, the ability of students to present better, tell better stories, to leverage digital technology, to manage projects better, to do, in short, 101 things that are relevant to the whole EdgeMakers experience. So we've even found that a lot of teachers are interested in this notion of being change agents themselves. So the idea that they would learn these skills is relevant not just to dish them out to the students, but to acquire that repertoire for themselves. By the way, so in the digital platform, or I shouldn't use the word platform, in our digital ecology, there are ways in which students can interact with students globally, students can interact with teachers, and teachers can interact with other teachers. So we imagine that it will be a very powerful community development tool for enabling teachers to interact with teachers of similar interests around the world. Now, if those of you, there may be some of you that are particularly interested in the technology strategy, and I can actually show you the videos on my laptop here after this formal session, but we're not a learning management system and we're not a typical digital platform. We developed our digital environment because we want it to be an innovation learning environment. And it incorporates a lot of tools and collaboration capabilities that I think are very relevant to what we're trying to do. The next phase of our technology development is towards a system that we call Luminary. Luminary is, imagine a travel agency where you go because you want to plan a learning journey. And you could be a kid in a refugee camp with a cell phone, or you could be a kid sitting in Beverly Hills with limitless resources. The travel agent, quote unquote, adjusts themselves to your requirements, designs an itinerary for you, which you're free to modify. So it's a fully personalized, adaptive learning system that goes through our increasing ocean of content around these subjects, these 21st century skill subjects, and allows for self-directed learners from around the world to interact with our system. So I'm being given this sign, and let me just make a couple of observations. One is that I'm very excited about the opportunity to collaborate with educators, with government agencies, with sponsors in Dubai, because I think there is an opportunity here to create a globally significant prototype of an innovation learning system that's national in scope and that's relevant. I think Expo 2020 is an obvious, star on the horizon for developing these kinds of capabilities. And I'm here basically to do, pardon me, some feasibility study of how we might implement a strategy in Dubai. Right now, EdgeMakers is not available in Dubai. We'd have to kind of figure out how to deploy it here to do it correctly. And right now, our digital materials are not accessible in the self-directed format that I mentioned. They will be available in the first quarter of next year. So there is an opportunity to do things that are completely digital. But our preference, much as with India, we went there and snapped up some of the top schools almost effortlessly and now have 100 of the premier marquee schools in India that are our reference accounts, while we then work with government and with commercial distributors, because as you know, there's over 1 million schools in India, so getting to all of them is going to be a bit of a headache. In Dubai, obviously, diverse, compact, collaborative community. We've enjoyed very, very good dialogue with senior government officials, potential sponsors, and educators. So, I'm John at edgemakers.com. Our website is edgemakers.com. You can take a look at it. The website doesn't tell you what we are about. It is a community site for young people. It's blogs. It's a lot of content that's relevant. With that, let me just take a final 2-minute and close with a piece of music that I think will kind of illustrate why we're doing this and why it is important. So you'll probably recognize this tune, at least I hope you will. So see you on the other side of the rainbow for education and innovation.